Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sirius Report. My name is Ken Shorgen. I'm here with London Paul. And Paul, there's an interesting sort of turnaround that we're going to look at today in regards to how sanctions are used and potentially how counter-sanctions could be used against the West after their decades of using them against any of the nations that haven't fallen in line with the rules-based order. Paul, want to thank you as always for being a part of the great discussion. And
And of course, you also.
probably starting with what Putin came out and talked about in regards to strategic metals is a great point to start with.
Yeah, well, let's start off with a massive misinterpretation by the West, what he meant, because it had nothing to do with what the mainstream media thinks, and frankly, just about all the alt media. Obviously, we don't know everyone who's discussing it, but the general consensus when Putin came out and said, well, if you use these weapons and you strike targets inside Russia, then we're effectively saying to you, NATO countries, that you would then be at war with Russia. And everyone's interpretation of that was, well, that means they're going to have World War III. Russia's going to start launching nuclear weapons at Western countries. That is absolutely not what he meant. In fact, it's the absolute opposite. They have no intention of striking the West with any weapons. Why would they do it? Because there's a risk, or clearly then, of huge escalation. And again, it's back to the point. Russia doesn't want World War III. The United States doesn't want World War III. The alt media wants to believe that World War III is happening every 5 minutes, and so does the mainstream media, because there's obviously ulterior motives for wanting to convince everyone that's the case. With the mainstream media, it's because Russia's this evil dictatorship and an aggressor, and the alt media because it's clickbait and they get lots of people viewing their YouTube clips, etc., etc. But let's get to the reality of this. One small point before we get into the reality is Russia doesn't care whether the West fires ATACMS or Storm Shadow missiles any further into Russia. Why don't they care? Because they've been doing it anyway. Russia has shot down numerous ATACMS that have been trying to strike Russian soil like Crimea. Did they escalate then and start a nuclear war with the West? No. They've also attacked other sites in what Russia now regards as Russia. Okay, the West doesn't, but Russia does. It's, as far as they're concerned, it's sovereign Russian territory. Have they responded? Absolutely not. They were making a point, but it's an extremely important point. What Putin is saying is, yes, it's a declaration of war, but how are we going to respond to the war? And a big hint was given on Russian television, because often when they start ministerial meetings, for the first few minutes, it's televised. And clearly it's an opportunity to make some pointed statements. And Putin made this pointed statement when he came out and said, we're a very resource-rich country. Now, maybe we could look to restrict the access of countries to these rich resources that we have, meaning hostile countries, meaning unfriendly countries, meaning the United States and Europe, etc. And he then proceeded to reel off this huge list of critical resources, including, of course, oil, gas, gold, uranium, etc. And then promptly turned to Putin and went, can we do this? Can we look into this? Oh, yes, most certainly. Meaning we already are looking into this. We're already drawing up lists. Now, people in the West may be a bit confused why I'm saying this. Well, the plain simple fact is, and this is not well understood, the United States is heavily dependent on Russia. And if Russia turns the screw with regards to resource access, then the United States is in for a world of trouble. And this is why, just 2 examples. Uranium. The US needs enriched uranium in huge quantities. It's heavily dependent on Russia for that. If Russia stopped sending it very quickly, the US's 100 nuclear power plants would have to be shut down. Now, the amount of energy they produce without it would cause the US a world of pain. Then we come on to the issue of oil, and everyone goes, but the United States is a major exporter of oil. Yes, they are, but here's the problem. It's light and sweet oil. It's not heavy oil. The US needs heavy oil to mix with their light oil to produce diesel, to produce jet fuel and bunker fuel. Without those, no ships are going, no aircraft are going, and anything that utilizes diesel in the US is not happening. This is why the United States was desperately trying to get a color revolution going in Venezuela, because they want to control Venezuela, which has heavy oil. It's also why upsetting Venezuela was a stupid decision. Who's another nation who could give them heavy oil? The Iranians. Well, Iran's never going to give the US anything. So they're currently totally dependent on Russia. And even though Russia is at war, effectively, with the United States via Ukraine, Russia has honored agreements and given them what they needed. But Putin is alluding to that. That would cause devastation for the United States, as one example. And they could extrapolate that to other nations that require Russia's critical resources as one example. That is what he was alluding to. That is why, and of course, people aren't going to be aware that these kind of comments were made unless they speak Russian or have access to Russian television, or know someone who has access to Russian television. But these are very clear statements. That was a clear statement of intent. So no, Putin is not going to start World War III. He's not going to fire nuclear weapons at the West. He doesn't need to. He can cause the West a world of pain without firing a single missile. And that's the big difference between, obviously, where the West just implements and imposes ludicrous sanctions, which blow up in the face of the West, and has done throughout the whole of the Ukraine war, because they never sit there and make a measured perspective as to what that would entail. What would that mean? If we do this, it may look in principle great to impose this on Russia, but they should have learned from Iran how sanctions don't work. For decades, they've not worked. So therefore, on that basis, they make foolish decisions. The big difference Russia does is goes, how can we harm the West? Now, if the US doesn't get Russia's heavy oil, it doesn't matter. It's not a huge problem for Russia. They've got other markets. Same with the uranium. It doesn't matter to them, not least because they want to build more nuclear power plants inside Russia. Also, there's countries all over the global south want to build them. They want access to uranium. So there's another market. So it's not something that's going to visibly harm Russia itself, but the damage it could cause potentially if they impose these on the West is enormous. So the West got a bit of a subtle hint. Now, the question is, do they realize this subtle hint, or have they not realized it? And the way they are, they probably haven't, but there may be an argument certain people have. They've recognized what this means. And therefore, that's why they're panicking. That's why people are suddenly coming out with all these noises and saying things about Ukraine and the war that they've never previously mentioned, because suddenly they're going, well, we will be perceived to be hostile. Why are we hostile? Because we're providing Ukraine with weapons. We're providing Ukraine with financial aid. And therefore, Russia may perceive us to be a hostile nation. And if they invoke these kind of sanctions against us, we're in huge trouble. I mean, just look at Germany. Germany is a classic example. And we can discuss Germany in a bit more detail shortly, as to a nation who has suffered because of sanctions imposed on Russia. And of course, the United States blowing up Nord Stream, which really has caused them immense damage and huge, enormous ongoing problems. But just to come back to the first point, that's why Putin said what he did. And the West, of course, concocted this whole fabricated story in the first place, partly because they wanted to see the reaction from Putin. Everyone in the West goes, well, the reason they're all behaving the way they are in the West now is because he's going to go to war with them and with nuclear weapons. No, absolutely not. Because blowing up the other side of the world is going to have huge ramifications for the rest of the world in doing so. There is a law of unintended consequences in doing so. And also, the risk is, well, it could erupt into a global war, which no one wants. But if you can harm another nation implementing such sanctions that you're immune to, then that poses a very serious and credible threat. And anyone in the West who actually engages their brain will know this to be the case. And now they'll be seriously going, hang on a minute, we have to do something to deal with the Ukraine war in a very different way. So therefore, do we really want to be seen to be escalating the aggression as a proxy country, given Russia's threatening to do what it's going to do? And do we take Russia seriously? Then finally they will do this. Well, China did it with germanium and gallium with respect to semiconductors, which is going to really wreck the United States' semiconductor business. They've also done it with antimony, which is needed in military applications. So China's demonstrated the damage you can do in a very innocuous way. And for China, it's not an economic damage to them. But for the United States, in this case, it's enormously damaging.
Yeah, interestingly enough, we've talked for quite a while in the past regarding how sanctions by the West against Russia, China, Iran, etc., have actually boomeranged and how they've affected the economies of these nations. Well, the reason that they've affected the economies of Germany, France, United States, etc., is because of the fact that they relied so much on imports from these countries. Well, take it to another extent. What if, and that's what you posed at the very beginning, these nations started imposing their own sanctions on the West, on these countries? Take Germany, for example. One of the reasons that Germany had to expand into Norway and into Baku during World War I or World War II and then World War I, respectively, is because they do not have a natural energy source. Coal is there, but coal in many instances is limited. So they've also, if they get cut off from uranium, if they change their mindset, especially through changes in the political structure, and decide they want to build new nuclear facilities for energy, well, they've got to get the uranium from somewhere. They've got to get the natural gas from somewhere. They've got to get the oil from somewhere. Right now, they're not getting it, and they're relying upon the United States, which is selling it to them at exorbitant costs. The LNG is much higher than the natural gas you would get from Russia. But I think there's another side note that we're seeing take place in this as we go. And it's the fact that Africa is throwing off the final yoke of their colonialism. France especially has relied heavily on African nations providing them all the resources that they need. Well, if Russia shows what sanctions can do to those who want to impose their hegemonic or proxy, domination over these countries, even as to the point of doing color revolutions or affecting political outcomes, then if Africa starts doing sanctions against the West when they've relied upon them and built their entire empires on that, all of a sudden you're going to see the West, have to look upon itself and start pillaging, its own resources, if it even has the resources to be able to do this. And more importantly, they're going to have to cut back on a lot of the foreign and economic policies that they've implemented. I'll take another example. You put these stupid tariffs on China because the United States corporations are no longer as competitive. Well, China right now has, for all intents and purposes, and Germany's doing this too, putting tariffs on EV cars. China, for all intents and purposes, has come out with some of the best EV cars on the planet. Now you have the West, which has been pushing this Green New Deal and net zero carbon footprint garbage. You would think, logically, that it doesn't matter the cost if you can get as many of these vehicles in, and yes, you're going to compete with our own industries. We want to bring down the carbon footprint. But what China has done has proven the point that it's not just about imposing this carbon footprint garbage. It's also about how can our companies profit from it. It's just been a profit scheme where China is sitting there going, you know what? Let's help the environment and help our own people. So the multipolar world, especially not just Russia, China, et cetera, they're suddenly seeing that things can be cost effective and they can be improvement. And if it comes to push to shove, why would we necessarily want to send our resources to the West, which is going to vilify us in every capacity or try to dominate us, and instead sanctioning them the same way they've been sanctioning us? It's going to probably duplicate the efforts of what maybe sanctions from the West on Iran, et cetera, has done in the past. It's going to be twofold, threefold, maybe even tenfold, because the sanctions that were on Iran were its ability to sell its own products. Now, sanctions against the West would be, you get no products, period.
Yeah, exactly. And just to take your point with regards, just a small point with regards to Europe getting LNG from the US, that's actually less now than Russian LNG. So if Russia then just cuts off all LNG to Europe, then Europe's in a world of pain. Forget what the US provides them, and which it well, forget in the sense that it costs huge, 5 times more. It's far more expensive than rebadged Russian LNG, but it's they're still getting huge amounts of Russian energy via the back door. If Russia goes, you're not having any of this energy via the back door, they're in a world of pain. So that's one example. And you mentioned Africa, and it is a really good example, because let's start off. The global South nations are never going to do anything hostile against another nation for no reason other than being hegemonic, for want of a better description. So there would have to be a justifiable reason. But there historically have been plenty of justifiable reasons, because regime change, starting wars, funding rebels in countries, trying to steal assets on the cheap out of these countries, being there when they're not welcome, please leave our country. Now, plenty of directly and indirectly hostile actions. Now, if they persist, you're absolutely right, Ken. These countries in Africa could turn around and go, you're not having access to our resources. Rather like, as you say, France with uranium. France's access to these markets is going to be curtailed. France, obviously, seemingly acquiring gold from these countries for next to nothing. That's all going to end. So it's going to start dramatically affecting these countries, not even necessarily through sanction, just leave our country. If they leave the country, where they've been effectively stealing or acquiring assets very cheaply, that's not going to happen. But then there is the argument, if you persist in meddling in our countries, which of course they're always doing, yeah, we could sanction you. Maybe we'll cut off supplies to you of all bunch of critical resources. So therefore, this is a huge problem potentially for the West going forward. This is why the counter-sanction move is extremely dangerous for the West. The West has been sat there being arrogant, but the world's changing. And if countries feel they've got the military support and the financial support of the Russians, the Chinese. Maybe countries also have the support of Iran through energy requirements, then they're going to be more emboldened to look after themselves. I think this is why we've seen this huge change of governance structure inside Africa. Okay, people say it's the military's taken over. Yes, that's true. Eventually, they'll need to have a proper so-called democratically elected government. That's absolutely true as well. But for now, these governments are constantly also under threat from coups, attempted coups. We've seen it in Venezuela. We're seeing it across, Southeast Asia. It's happened attempts in Indonesia, Thailand, Myanmar. The list goes on. We saw it quite a few years ago in Hong Kong. So the argument is, well, if you're attacking us, maybe we'll stop exporting goods to you, and maybe we'll export them to other countries in the global south because we're developing these other markets. So it is part of a far broader issue that affects the West, including the United States and other countries. And you only have to look at the problems Germany now has. Germany, just because it no longer has access to cheap Russian energy, is an enormous world of pain. Every day of every week, there's more economic data that supports this viewpoint. Well, Germany certainly needs other imports. If Germany gets cut off from those imports, the world of pain has just increased exponentially. And maybe, just maybe, this is why we've seen noises coming out of Germany in the last week or two, trying to adopt a more conciliatory approach to the war, reiterating we're not sending Taurus missiles to Ukraine, and generally just trying to sound like they want to be on the right side of history and end the war, because maybe, some intelligent minds, because there are some in Berlin, are looking at this going, hang on a minute, we've suffered enough because of Nord Stream, and if they impose any more sanctions on us, the problem's going to grow exponential. And just a final point in that regard, is it just a coincidence that that Scholz has come out and demanded an independent investigation to ascertain who was responsible for Nord Stream? Is this just a coincidence that all these things are happening? Maybe it is, but I suspect it isn't. And this is that finally some heads in the West are going, you know what, Russia could cause us a world of pain through sanctioning us. And if the Chinese join in, the Iranians join in, as you say, Ken, by extension, global South countries, the West is suddenly going to have a problem on top of all the other problems they have with their economies, financial system, etc. And it's just something they cannot absorb. They can't get around this problem. I mean, there might be long-term solutions, but they're going to have problems for 5 years, 10 years, maybe more. And in that time, they're just, their economies, financial system will be gutted on top of the existing problems. So it's just massive problems compounding upon massive problems. And this is why the West is extremely vulnerable to these counter sanctions, or the risk of them, of course, being imposed upon them.
I think the most difficult thing is to see what the reactions are going to be. Obviously, you mentioned Scholz, but for years of him being in office, Scholz has been a puppet of U.S. policy and anti-Russia and fully Ukraine. Now all of a sudden it's changing. Why? Likely because new political antagonists are threatening to kick him and his party out of office. So all of a sudden reality strikes in and ideology is swamped. And I think more and more, depending on what happens in the U.S. election, depending on what happens in Germany, France, a few other places, you're going to see a turnaround, because the consequences of the sanctions from the West onto their boomeranging onto their own economies has now brought what they've been doing into the mindset of the populace, as the populace takes a look at higher prices, rents, what's going on with immigration and refugees and all this. It's suddenly coming to a head, and the last thing that they need is for another element to be put into the equation, which really takes what is perhaps a serious recession into a depression, or even a depression into a collapse. So I think leaders are starting to see this in the West, and it's perfect timing for the likes of President Putin to emphasize this publicly. Things may be bad for you, but we can make it much worse. Anyway, Paul, I think that's a good place to probably cut it.
It is.
I want to thank you, as always, for being a part of this great discussion.
And likewise.
And to everybody here at the Sirius Report community, thank you for being a part of the show as well. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe. And until the next time we get together, have a great day.